Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. So, everybody, welcome back to Marvel Reread Club, and welcome back to our special guest, Rachel Gluckstern. Welcome back, Rachel.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
So, good people, listen to podcasts in forward order and listen to them from beginning to end. Bad people listen to podcasts from most recent to oldest. But we should acknowledge that those bad people exist. And to help out those bad people, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about who you are. You are a great comic books editor who has been editing for, 20 years?
Oh my God, when you say it like that.
And you have edited a lot of great books at DC Comics, and now you are a freelance editor of not just graphic novels, but also novels, correct?
Yeah, I've spent 10 years at DC during the multiple crisis events that were all infinite or finite, through the New 52, and then all the way up before, the Doomsday Clock stuff started and whatnot. So it's been a while since I was at DC. And since then, I have transitioned out into trade publishing, online publishing, self-publishing, editing people who like to self-publish. So I've done novels, I've done coloring books, I've done graphic novels, I've done digital comics, I've done sticker books. Yeah. I've even written some stuff, all of it nonfiction, all of it for kids. So if you really want to hear an interesting fact about vomit, I'm your gal.
Yes, you wrote, we mentioned last time that you wrote a book called The Gross Science of Sneezing, Coughing, and Vomiting.
Yep.
So that is fantastic.
Could you favor us with a single fact that we probably don't know?
So this is my favorite fact. Vomiting is not actually caused by being ill per se. Like, it's not necessarily what's going on in your stomach. There's a node in your brain that is like the vomit center, and your brain has to get triggered for you to feel the urge to purge, which is why people might throw up after motion sickness, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rachel. So
I did have one question. You said you're not doing Howling Commandos?
No.
Did I include that in the issues that I uploaded?
You did, and I'm sad because it was a really good issue.
No, I kind of regret that we decided not to do the Howling Commandos as we went through this, but we did. So I apologize. That is entirely my mistake. We can talk about it if you want. You can take the lead on talking about that one.
I don't remember all the commandos' names. So that would be disastrous. Okay. But yeah, that was in there, and it was a really solid issue. It really gave me like classic EC Comics vibes, to be honest.
Wow, like a Harvey Kurtzman issue?
Yeah, just very much. There was the personal stakes and the war setting, and Dick Ayers' art was fantastic, although there were a couple times where he just randomly changed scenes and the captions were very snarky about that. They're like, well, Dick likes to draw planes, so we're gonna let him do that.
Yeah, and that is also inked by John Tartaglione. Yeah. It looks like,
and it looks way better.
Yes, yeah. It does. I'm usually not a big fan of Dick Ayers pencils, but something about him and John Tartaglione kind of they work well together.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into Fantastic Four number 56. On the cover, Claw, the murderous master of sound. And you see Claw in his new solid sound form on the cover, and he is using his sound cannon hand thing in a way that is sort of symbolically trapping some of the Fantastic Four, all the ones who are currently in New York and not traveling through Asia at the moment. Right, so let's get on into this here. When they were in Wakanda recently, Sue and Reed seemed to be able to have their honeymoon that they had never had before. Some people have speculated that was where Sue got pregnant with Franklin Richards, who will be born in several months at this point. But the honeymoon seems to be over once again. Sue is looking for her husband and can't find him. She loves him. She wants to be close to him from time to time. He is doing research, space-time research, we saw the Space-Time Research Room in issue 51 or 52. It was the This Man, This Monster.
51.
51. This Man, This Monster that introduced what will soon be called the Negative Zone, but at this point is referred to as subspace. We have a really fantastic splash on page 3 of a big Visi screen of some sort that Reed is looking through to see into, and I'll just call it the Negative Zone because that's what I think of it as, with some weird wispy creature that's floating through the area that is really fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then they are suddenly zapped when Claw comes in. Now, Claw looks very much different from the way he looked last time. Last time, the way he looked is actually the way the MCU has been portraying him, portrayed by Andy Serkis, is relatively true to the look that he had last time that we saw him in Wakanda. But he has been transformed into solid sound, which even as a kid I found a little bit hard to suspend my disbelief on, but he just looks so cool that I'm willing to give it a pass.
Oh, I completely disagree. I always loved his solid sound form. I always thought that was a cool idea. And I absolutely love it in Secret Wars later when Doom is like, I need to capture the Beyonder. Well, I will grab Claw. I will slice him into tiny slices that will then be able to be sort of radar dishes that can then absorb the power of the Beyonder into me. And the horrific image of the Claw sliced into little slices was memorable for me as a kid. I love solid sound Claw.
Well, like I said, he looks awesome.
Yeah.
I find it a little hard to suspend my disbelief on it, but even as a kid. But I'm good with it. So we see that the Inhumans are still trying to get out of where they're trapped, and at this point, this is what they're calling the Negative Zone, is the area that's trapping them in to their, is it a city, a palace, a fortress, whatever it is that's currently ensconced in the Himalayas. Of course, it was originally in the Andes, but then they decided it was more convenient to have it in the Himalayas for the story they were telling. Black Bolt had just in the previous episode tried to use his destructive voice together with some sort of a bomb to try to get them out of this prison, but in the end realized it was going to blow everyone up, and so they're meanwhile trying to get Maximus to let them out, and he will not do it, and he is mad. So, Claw then breaks in on Sue, explains that he currently has Reed and Ben trapped in the space-time room, and explains how he was turned into this solid sound creature when he was defeated in Wakanda. Sue is trying to fight back against him, but it's not really working. Meanwhile, Reed and Ben are trying to get out of their sonic barrier trap that they're in right now. Reed comes up with a gizmo that's going to give Thing enough extra protection that he, with his near invulnerability put together with that, is going to be able to get out. Now, I will point out on page 11 in particular, that is a very John Byrne looking page to me. Particularly the first panel in that page. If you told me that was a John Byrne panel, I probably would have agreed with you if I didn't look at it really closely. So you can really see some of where John Byrne was getting his approach to doing the Fantastic Four. So we get some fantastic art of Thing breaking his way through this sonic barrier. Oh, and as Reed is putting the thing on him, Reed is saying, "There's one thing we can try, even though it may be dangerous." Thing says, "Yeah, dangerous for who? For you, I'm afraid, since you're the stronger one of us who'll have to attempt it." Thing says, "How come you never cook up any gizmos that work better on guys who can stretch?" Which is a good point.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm sure you could probably do that.
Very valid.
Of course, with Claw being a creature of sound, Sue's invisibility doesn't do her any good. He's able to make every footfall of hers sound like a bass drum going off. And Thing is able to protect her at the last minute from a blow that theoretically would have killed her. Meanwhile, in the Himalayas, Johnny, who is trying to find the Inhumans, is with Wyatt Wingfoot. They have found Lockjaw. Apparently, Lockjaw is just teleporting all sorts of random places. It sounds like on different worlds.
Yeah, I love the alien world that Lockjaw takes them to. I always love Lockjaw, and I love that they're like, "Okay, Lockjaw, take us to the Inhumans." Like, "Oh dear God, where have you taken us?"
So Lockjaw doesn't necessarily know to trust these two. He doesn't know Johnny very well, and so he doesn't want to take them back to the Inhumans because he doesn't want to lead anyone to them. And once again, we get one of these, like, he meant well kind of things in that Wyatt Wingfoot is saying, who's better equipped for the task than I? Have I not the blood of the Comanche in my veins? Did my forefathers not tame the wild stallion? Did they not? Anyway, so, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, he meant well. It's cringy today, but, I'm willing to give it a pass, but then I am not Native American. So eventually Reed and Sue are able to get back to each other, although this is apparently part of Claw's plan. He wanted them together at the same time. But then in comes a ship, a little delivery rocket to the rescue. It comes right in the Baxter building and delivers some vibranium knuckles for Reed, and he is able to use it to defeat Claw since they absorb sound. Yeah, he had apparently radioed Wakanda and said, hey, Black Panther, you're super awesome and powerful and cool and rich. Can you send me some vibranium to where I can defeat Claw? And Black Panther's like, hey, you're my friends, and B, I hate Claw. So, yeah, sure, here we go. So he was able to send it to him. So just once again, further establishing Black Panther as a super badass and a good guy who has Reed Richards' respect.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a shame that Black Panther isn't in this issue. I think, he sends the winning vibranium bands, and then they do a quick FaceTime with him on the last page. But Claw's Black Panther's villain, and it seems sort of a shame to have him fighting the Fantastic Four instead of fighting Black Panther directly.
Yeah, although, as we talked about with George's Genti, there's always the thing about, like, yeah, well, he is a king. He has a job that he's supposed to be doing, where he can't just necessarily be gallivanting off. Of course, they have him gallivant off a lot anyway, just because he's cool and they want him to be in stories. And then we get just a little teaser at the end of the book about Dr. Doom having plans to take the Silver Surfer's power.
A classic scene.
Yes. And that is it for this issue. Once again, Lee and Kirby and Sinnott all at the top of their game, doing, I think you could argue, the best work that any one of the three will ever do in their careers, and they're doing it simultaneously right here. So what is not to like? Rachel, your thoughts?
This was indeed a really good issue. Historically, I'm not the biggest fan of the Fantastic Four, and I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed how Richard and the Thing actually had some bonding moments, as opposed to always just squabbling.
Mm-hmm.
Sue's useless, but I'm used to that.
She's not always useless, unfortunately. It really is unfortunate when they do that, because she has been shown to be really valuable from time to time, but then they just forget to do that.
Yeah.
It's the first time they ever faced Dr. Doom, she's the one who took him out, literally with her hands tied behind her back.
This is true.
So, it really does tend to be more of a shame when they forget that she can and should be that capable.
Yeah, but it's kind of badass here how, like, she's like being chased and then dives for a chest and pulls out a massive gun and is shooting Claw with a massive gun. That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes. That splash panel you mentioned on page 3 with Reed looking to the negative zone and the image that's on his screen. Fantastic. So much great Kirby tech in this issue. Obviously, this is the first appearance of Claw as we tend to think of him, right?
Mm-hmm, yes.
It is too bad that Black Panther couldn't actually be in this issue, but except at the very end. But I enjoyed Reed actually physically fighting a guy, which I don't think of as happening too often. It probably happens more than I think of, because like I said, I do not read Fantastic Four very regularly, but it was really fun to watch Reed just punch a guy,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Panel 4 on page 18, where he just gives him this uppercut that just lifts the Claw off his feet, and his arm is stretching. I love it.
I knew that was the panel you were looking for there. I was like, oh, it's going to be page 18, panel 4 that she's talking about, isn't it? Yes, it is fantastic.
And then the first panel of page 19, where Reed is like jumping over a blast and stretching himself out. That's
Oh, yeah.
incredible too. Yeah, this was a fun one issue thing. We've got Claw in his classic look. We've got at least a little cameo by Black Panther. We've got Johnny looking for Crystal, which was a very big storyline. And then Doctor Doom setting up to assault Silver Surfer is also a huge moment in Fantastic Four history. So this issue has a lot.
We have what is essentially one big 16-issue storyline going from issue 44 to issue 60. And it's sort of like that storyline is like, first you have the Inhumans, then you have Silver Surfer with Galactus, then you have Black Panther and Claw, and then they all mix and match here as we barrel towards the big climax in issue 60. And this is not the strongest issue of any of those storylines, but it is still a very good issue. And it serves all of these storylines. We have the Inhumans in here, we have Claw and Black Panther briefly in here, and we have both Silver Surfer and now adding the key element of Doctor Doom in this issue. And so it big promise of what more is to come.
Actually, what I find interesting, since you've mentioned that, is, last time we were talking about Spider-Man and how, I mentioned how there are like 3 different stories going on and it was a little disjointed. There are so many stories going on in context to what you just said, and this feels like a more complete issue.
And then let me just say before we move on that this is, once again, as we talked about in last episode, here we have the first episode of Fantastic Four where it just says at the beginning, produced by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, delineated by Joe Sinnott, lettering by Artie Simek. So every issue of Fantastic Four from this point on will have Stan Lee and Jack Kirby credited on the same line, neither credited as writer or artist, which seems to be Stan Lee's way of keeping Jack Kirby on the book and saying like, look, I'm not the writer, you're not the artist, we're co-equal creators here, which is great. It's great to have Jack Kirby getting more credit in all of the Fantastic Four books from this point on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
so Matt, I think it's your turn next.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to Strange Tales, number 150. It's a big number, but they do nothing to acknowledge that they don't go like, big anniversary issue or anything like that. And it's interesting. This is the first time, I think, where they changed the logo of the book to say Strange Tales. And it says Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And then co-equal with that, it says Doctor Strange. I don't think Doctor Strange has ever gotten a logo on the cover of this book before. And
also, I found it odd and kind of, I think, a little bit insulting that I don't think that Doctor Strange, there may have been one issue during the Ditko days when he actually was the star on the cover. Maybe 2, but almost always he had very little acknowledgement that he was in this book. And now that he's off, he's had more covers than S.H.I.E.L.D. has.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's always awkward when we discuss these things when the cover applies to the back half of the book, because you end up discussing the cover and then switching again. But I'll go ahead and do that. We have this issue where it's mainly still the big battle with Kalu, but the cover is already bewitched by the villain who will be introduced at the end of the issue, Umar. And indeed, on the cover, we see Kalu being dispatched, being sent away, and then Umar arriving. Umar, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I like this cover. I think it's an excellent Everett cover. Umar is a great villain. She's got a much better look than Clue, so I'm happy to have him being rocketed off into the unknown and have Umar here. And I like Everett's Doctor Strange. I just like the way he draws him. But first, let's go ahead and jump into Hydra Lives, the Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Supreme Headquarters International Espionage Law Enforcement Division storyline, introducing the inconceivable menace of the Overkill Horn. Don't Yield Back S.H.I.E.L.D. Script Stan Lee, layouts Jack Kirby, pencils John Buscema, inks Frank Giacoia. And I think that Giacoia does so much of a better job than John Tartaglione did in Hulk. And I love this issue. This is the real debut of Buscema in the Marvel Universe as far as I'm concerned, because this is the first one where he looks great. And we begin with, they have, out of everybody in S.H.I.E.L.D., they decide the best person out of the entire organization to test their extremely deadly new equipment is the head of the organization, Nick Fury himself, which everybody is pointing out is a terrible idea. But he's like, nope, let's go ahead and do it. What are you waiting for? Dum-dum, I ain't getting any younger in this blasted anti-shock seat. He goes ahead and with beautiful Buscema art, I love his details of Dum-Dum Dugan's face on page 2. Dum-Dum Dugan's like, all right, this is the dumbest idea in the world, but let's go ahead and trigger this overkill horn of ours and see what it does to Fury in his anti-shock seat. And indeed, it almost kills Fury. And there is a wonderful sequence on page 4 where they have this sonic beam, laser-like sonic beam that destroys a bunch of abandoned buildings and then destroys fighter jets and eventually destroys a nuclear missile and sets it off. And they're like, okay, this is clearly a terrible device we have invented. And the only reason we invented it is because to prove that the other side can also invent it too. And there must be an actual overkill horn out there in the enemy's hands. And now that we've built one ourselves and seen what it can do, we're really worried about what the enemies will do when they have it.
Did I miss something? Or was there absolutely no reason, given what we're seeing the overkill horn can do, for them to shoot it right at Nick Fury? Like, what did that have to do with the test?
I actually don't know.
They had to know what it would do to people.
It just seems to be a complete non sequitur. When you look at it, you're like, wait a minute, what? Oh, what? Okay, go on.
Yes. So then Fury is eventually wheeled out in a wheelchair with a big bandaged up head, and he is trying to recover. And then Dum Dum, is Dum Dum just doing this out of sympathy? Dum Dum is also in a wheelchair, also with a bandaged up head. I don't think he was injured, but then they get in a big wheelchair duel, and they start slamming their wheelchairs into each other. And then Fury quickly recovers, is invited. So we just had a big storyline with a sophisticated European villain called Count Bornag Royale with cheese. And then we get a new sophisticated European villain here named Don Caballero, or Caballero, however you want to pronounce
Caballero.
it.
He's South American, and he's Don Caballero.
In fairness,
Don
he's
Caballero.
not European. He's South American.
Yes.
So different.
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry. You're right. Yes, one of his many South American states.
Matt doesn't know or care about any differentiation about anyone outside of the U.S.
Yes, that is true. So then he has. Well, I thought he's throwing a party in the ancient ruins of the dead city of Carnapolis, which is presumably around Greece, not around South America. We then get a nice storyline. One thing I missed from this book is we haven't had a lot of spying recently. We had a lot of. I feel like earlier in this book was when this book started because Man from U.N.C.L.E. was the biggest show on the air, and they wanted to sort of coast on that, on those fumes. And we had a lot more spying early on in the book. We haven't had a lot recently, but we've got a nice little bit of spying here where one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s spies is snooping around Carnapolis, and then one of the statues comes to life behind him and attacks him. And then Don Caballero comes out and says, the fool says, I suspected he was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. all the time, and has him hauled away. And then we get to Fury eventually is back in the United States. He is struck by an overkill horn that seems to have struck their headquarters, and he says that the only thing to do now is to accept Don Caballero's invitation to the party on Carnapolis, and he is going to have to go there and do it. So that is the end of this issue. It is a cleansing during the Hulk. This is the true Marvel debut of John Buscema, looking absolutely gorgeous, doing a great job in this book. He will not stay. Next book, we will have an even greater artist appear. Maybe not a greater artist, but an even better artist for this book appear, and we will begin the run of Jim Steranko. But this was a nice, when they reprint the Steranko books, they always reprint this issue, since this is the beginning of the storyline that then Steranko will continue. And so I first read this comic as a kid in a collection of Steranko stories, and it's a nice little what could have been if Buscema had stayed on the book. I love this book. Rachel, what do you think of this book?
Oh, this was a great story, 100%. And I agree, the art is killer. I did not realize how early in John Buscema's career it was, so that's incredible. I will say I do wonder what impact Jack Kirby doing the layouts had on his art in this issue.
Oh, you have to wonder.
But it is incredible. Absolutely. Page 2, panel 3, Dum Dum Dugan's face there. Like, there's just so much happening. You know, he's concerned, he's committed, he is really caught in a bad place between what Nick Fury's demanding and what he knows is kind of stupid of Nick Fury to demand. It's beautiful art. Everybody's characterization is written very well, I feel. And I really do love how, for me, it's a very James Bondian type of spy theme where you have, you know, this magical igloo mansion under ice that Don Caballero, whatever his name is, seems to own. this whole, fancy cocktail thing where Nick Fury will be the guest of honor. You have Hydra starting to rise up again. It is just pure 60s high spy espionage, secret society stuff. I love every bit of that. It's a great issue.
It is.
Yeah, and I will also point out when you talk about individual panels that are fantastic, page 10, panel 5, where you get the close-up on Don Caballero as he's explaining that he knew that this was a S.H.I.E.L.D. spy.
Oh, yeah.
That is just a fantastic panel. And I mean, we got to give pretty much equal credit to how fantastic that is to Frank Giacoia, because that just really is fantastic. Yeah, I personally, like I said, I've got a bit of a problem with the whole thing of why Nick Fury was in this chair and doing this thing. It seems to serve absolutely no purpose for what the weapon is that they're talking about, which bothers me a little bit. But Don Caballero seems like he's a little Richard Branson, maybe.
Yeah.
or who was the Italian prime minister who had the so-called bunga bunga parties?
Berlusconi.
Yes, Berlusconi. So he seems like a Berlusconi or yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's great to see John Buscema, who is one of my favorite comics artists of all time. To see him come on board is very promising.
Yeah.
Matt, one thing, you said there hasn't been much actual spying lately. They didn't tell the story very well, but we did determine that Gabe Jones was deep undercover with the Secret Empire recently, although they did not handle that very well.
No, they did not. So we should point out that Buscema will not stay on either of these books. He will not stay on Hulk or S.H.I.E.L.D., even though it would be interesting to imagine what would have happened if he had. He will instead end up on the Avengers, thank God. Well, he will take the place of Don Heck and do a much better job. And then he will, ultimately be associated primarily with the Avengers and with Conan, these two very different books. He ends up working on both Avengers and Conan for more than 20 years. Those are very different books, and both of them are very different from Hulk and S.H.I.E.L.D. So he does a lot of very different stuff. But he will eventually find those two books where he will find his happy place.
I do want to mention two last things. One, Operation Overkill. That's a great code name. The Overkill Horn. That is a dumb name. Horn is just, don't bring that into your weaponry. That's not dumb. And when I talked about characterization, I actually was so happy for Jasper Sitwell when Nick Fury said Jasper was in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. while he was away on this mission. I thought that was so sweet, and you accomplished that in what? Like, you accomplished on 10 pages? 15 pages? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Got that characterization of Jasper and the dynamic between him and Fury, and then you had that payoff in a very short story. That is incredible storytelling.
I agree. Okay, well, let's move on to Doctor Strange, Master of Mystic Arts, The Conquest of Cthulhu, or Cthulhu, as Steve has been calling him. I gotta say, so Everett started off very faithfully aping Steve Ditko with his other dimensions, and now Everett is letting his freak flag fly. Everett is getting, by the time we get to the splash page of this issue, his extra dimensions are looking less ticklish, and they're looking so busy. Extra dimensionality behind Cthulhu cannot look more busy here. It is a little crazy. Cthulhu finally realizes that Doctor Strange and the Ancient One have turned themselves into candles, and you get sort of comedic art of him desperately huffing and puffing and blowing at the candles and then trying to wipe them out with his hand, and he just can't do it. Meanwhile, we have Doctor Strange and the Ancient One, while they are represented as candles in modern times, have gone back into the past. We had sort of awkward plotting where Cthulhu had stolen the Book of the Shanti, read it, and was like, nope, this isn't useful to me at all. I'll just put it back where I found it. And then Doctor Strange and the Ancient One are like, he was a fool to do that. We're going to find the Book of Ashanti and we're going to defeat him. So they go back and find the Book of Ashanti and realize that they can go back to the present, come out of their candles. Nice sequence on page 6 of Doctor Strange erupting from the flame of his candle. And he then fights for many pages. A nice little spectacular fight. Obviously, Everett is no Ditko. Ditko did it better. But one thing we've found over the last 4 months of this book is that Everett is really trying. Everett is bringing a lot to this book. He is bringing his all to this book and is still doing, I think, excellent mystic battling. He then defeats Cthulhu and sends him rocketing off into other dimensions. But we instantly start a new storyline where This is one of the most egregious Everett swipes of Ditko, where Everett is clearly like, uh-oh, I have to draw Clea for the first time, and I don't know how to draw her. I will just swipe Ditko entirely. And he's also swiping Ditko for the mindless ones here. We cut back to the Dark Dimension, where the mindless ones are always trying to escape from their mystic barrier, and they finally find a way to escape. But we have established how hard it was, even for Dormammu, who was a major power, to contain the mindless ones in their other dimension. Well, now we meet Dormammu's sister. Now, it was never clear if Dormammu was a human whose head was a flame because of his powers, or if he came from a race of flaming head creatures. But now we find out that no, he did not come from a race of flaming head creatures. He came from a human-looking race, and that he has a human-looking sister named Umar, or Umar, however you want to pronounce it, and that she is much better than Dormammu at very quickly cowing the mindless ones and sending them back behind their barrier. So that's a great way of establishing right away that she is like Dormammu, but even more powerful and more badass. She will turn out to be a great villain who will last for many, many years. A fantastic storyline in the 80s by Roger Stern and Paul Smith, in which Clea and Umar come to their ultimate confrontation. But this is a great introduction for her. I was worried from the cover that this would be another Boomerang and the Secret Empire type thing, where they would fall in love with the shiny new villain and forget to wrap up the previous storyline. Nope, I think they do a great job wrapping up the Clue storyline. He feels like totally and thoroughly wrapped up, defeated in a very nice sequence of events, and then we get this new villain who's going to be even better. I like this issue a lot. Rachel, what do you think of this issue?
Well, I have to say, since I've not been reading the previous issues, the cover promised me Umar. I was excited about Umar. It was not about Umar.
No.
They've been doing that a lot lately, like putting on the cover the thing that's revealed in the final panel, which, I don't like that either.
Now, I know from experience how things that are promised on the cover don't necessarily pay off in the issue because of the way solicits are done. At DC, we'd have to do them 3 months in advance. So you'd have a cover, and then by the time, the issue was actually done, story priorities might have shifted and the cover and the issue no longer entirely line up, but you can't say, oh, well, new cover, because people know which cover to look for. But I don't know what it was like back in the newsstand days, if they had to have covers well in advance or not. Maybe they thought that Umar would get more of a presence in this issue than she actually did. But agreed, actual great introduction of her. I love her. I love the fact that Bill Everett is drawing Namor's eyebrows on her. Big Namor vibes. But she looks fantastic. I was a little confused about switching immediately between storylines, but it was fun to have a typical magic fight. I believe the dialogue is Roy Thomas, and this is the type of book that was made for Roy Thomas. So overall, very solid issue. I liked the Nick Fury stuff better, but that doesn't mean this was bad. It's just, I bet that Umar stuff is really, really great to come.
Yeah, and the only thing I had to add is just, Matt, you skipped the credits. So, yes, this was gloriously edited by Stan Lee, again, giving himself first line, even when he is not writing it. Grandiloquently scripted by Roy Thomas, gorgeously drawn by Wild Bill Everett, grudgingly lettered by Artie Simak. So yeah, I believe that Denny O'Neil has scripted the last few issues of this. So Roy Thomas scripted 1 or 2 issues of Doctor Strange at the end of the Ditko run, but that he hasn't been back on this since, and that it's mainly been Denny O'Neil during his very brief first sojourn at Marvel.
Oh, wow. What a baby he must have been.
I know, right?
Oh, I think, yes. I think he was very young. That's right, because you then, when you ended up as the editor on Detective Comics, Rachel, you were you taking over directly from Denny O'Neil, or were there people in between?
Oh, Lord. Denny had already retired from DC by the time I came on board. I actually interned there in 2000, and that was when it was transitioning from Denny O'Neil to Bob Schreck running the Bat books. So Denny was moving towards his retirement at that time, but both were very gracious.
Did you know Denny?
He and I had lunch a few times when I was an intern, which, pretty cool for an intern.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I knew him in that regard. both he and Bob Schreck were really gracious mentors to me during my internship, and that honestly is why I remained in comics, because that internship was so great.
Nice.
That's great.
Yeah, Bob Schreck is the one who gave me my break at DC.
See?
So, yeah, good guy.
Good guy.
All right.
Just as an aside question, we're talking about how John Tartaglione is not a great match for John Buscema. And sometimes you just run into inkers and pencilers where that it's just not going to mesh well. And there are other people you're like, wow, this meshed amazingly. Steve, in your experience, and you don't have to name names,
right.
but have you ever had a penciler where you're like, you're great, and I just can't seem to make it work with you?
Yeah, I inked an issue of Green Arrow over I forget the guy's name. But yeah, I just remember that thing like, no, this dude's awesome, but man, I just like this stuff is looking terrible. What am I doing wrong? Yeah, I mean that's the one main one that I think of. There's another thing where I was inking a guy sort of, as I was sort of the pinch hitter who was coming in and, inking a few pages here and there when it was behind. And he liked the work I was doing and then asked me to ink a full issue over him. And I did that. And it's just like, for some reason, this is not working. So, yeah, it's a terrible feeling when you get that. But it happens.
Yeah. But then there are other people where you're like, this is clearly the artist I've been waiting for all my life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that was like me with, well, I don't know about the one, but yeah, that was like me with Brian Hurt or me with David Baldeón, or two of them that I can think of where it's like, oh, yeah, no, this works. This really works.
Oh, I remember you and David Baldeón.
You inked David on an issue of
I know.
Blue Beetle that Rachel edited, right?
Yeah, I believe, Rachel, you were either editor or assistant editor at that point.
I think
you were editor.
I thought assistant, but yeah, possibly.
Okay. Assistant under Joan, I'm guessing?
Yep.
Yeah. That sounds right to me. Yeah, so, and actually, I am going to be staying with David in Barcelona in August for a few days.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, we've stayed good friends.
Great. Okay. Well, fantastic. Right. Let's go ahead and move on to Tales of Suspense number 83.
Yes, Tales of Suspense 83, featuring Iron Man and Captain America. On the cover, the title is Victory, and we see Iron Man and Titanium Man above Washington, D.C. We see the Capitol building right between Titanium Man's legs as Titanium Man is getting just absolutely demolished by Iron Man. So this is a fight that began flying over Washington, D.C. in the previous issue, and it is continued and wrapped up in this issue. Smilin' Stan Lee author, Genial Gene Colan artist, gleeful Gary Michaels inker, affable Artie Simak letterer, ineffable Irving Forbush referee. So Pepper had just made the mistake of revealing that she, when watching this fight in the crowd, has a personal connection to Iron Man because, once again, secret identities, just no one cares about them in the Marvel Universe. So Titanium Man is using her as more or less a hostage. Iron Man is very quickly able to rescue her, though, so that just seems like a bit of a non sequitur in some ways. This is really just a big fight issue for the most part. Iron Man does at one point get a gadget out that he uses to act as like a grinder or something like that against Titanium Man that is, again, it's often neat to see him pull out extra gadgets that aren't just part of his regular armor. And we see that the press is very closely following this. So we have a massive splash page on page 6 with, I think you see way too much of the television camera there. We should have much more of Titanium Man and Iron Man in that splash page, and much smaller other stuff. We see that following this is, among others, Lyndon Johnson. And Matt, as you have pointed out, every time Lyndon Johnson shows up, Stan Lee has to have him using his line, "Men should reason together." So he says that again here.
It's not just Johnson here. We have Johnson and Robert McNamara, his secretary.
Is that who that is?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that is very clearly Robert McNamara, who is regarded as a bit of a war criminal today for his prosecution of the Vietnam War. But good caricature work here by Cohen and Abel, making it very clear that that is LBJ and Robert McNamara.
Good catch. I did not, I don't really think of knowing what Robert McNamara looks like, so I did not get that. I was wondering, it's like, I don't think that's Hubert Humphrey. I don't know. Anyway, all right, there's more fighting, and eventually Iron Man is able to access a panel on the back of Titanium Man's head and do something to his armor. Titanium Man seems to blow up. Is that what happens? Or does he take off? Topples to the ground, thunderous. Yeah, it looks like he just sort of blows up there, although clearly he isn't dead. At this point, this seems to placate Senator Byrd, who usually has a hate-on for Tony Stark and Iron Man, although I think they still have to go ahead and do the testimony, or at least they're supposed to have to. We see that Titanium Man didn't blow up, despite appearances earlier. He is flying off to rendezvous with a Soviet sub, and he gets there, and they're like, dude, what's he doing? He failed. He can't come back with us, and so they abandon him to theoretically sink into the ocean. And we see Tony and Pepper reunited, and even though they have never actually gotten together as a couple, they really seem to be a couple here at the end. So anyway, it's mainly a big ol' huge fight.
Well, you left out the big plot turn is that in the explosion, when Titanium Man seemingly blows up, as we have established many times in comic books over the years, the one thing that is guaranteed to give you amnesia is getting hit on the head or blown up. But what blows on the head giveth, they can also taketh away. When there's a new blow on the head, it suddenly takes away his amnesia, which means he suddenly remembers that Iron Man is Tony Stark. So that is the big cliffhanger at the end of the issue. I gotta say that we haven't seen much of Happy Hogan in Cohen's run on the book. He was knocked out, and then he was the Freak for a while, and now he's back. But I miss, generally speaking, I think Cohen has been a better pencil in this book than Heck, but I miss Heck's Happy Hogan. Heck had a lot of fun with Happy Hogan, and Happy Hogan had a very distinctive look. He had cauliflower ears, he had a perpetually frowny expression on his face, and this Happy Hogan just has none of the personality of Heck's Happy Hogan. He is an entirely generic, sort of handsome, almost like Robert Cummings-looking guy, without the cauliflower ear, without the pug nose, without the perpetual frown on his face, and has none of the personality of Heck's Happy Hogan.
So do I. That's one of the things, I'll just say I co-sign. So, Rachel, how about your thoughts on this?
It seemed like a pretty solid issue. Silver Age Iron Man is something I definitely have not read a lot of. Until the Marvel movies, Iron Man was never super interesting on his own for me. I liked him better in the Avengers. To your point about Happy Hogan, yes, he is a remarkably handsome Happy Hogan. It's very disconcerting. What I did like most was I felt really sad for Titanium Man at the end of the issue. He's like, I failed, but I did my best, you guys. I'm sure they'll understand. And then the sub is just like zooming away, saying, being like, bye, loser. And he's like, no, you can't leave me. It is actually really sad. And I didn't expect to feel sad for Titanium Man because, prior to that, his whole appearance this issue has been fighting Iron Man.
Yeah.
We talked last episode about weird splash pages by Gene Colan, and this splash page with the cameraman and the crowd. It's weird because where did this crowd come from? I had no idea there were other people around.
Oh, that was established in the previous issue, that there's a huge crowd that's been sort of commenting on the fight as it goes through.
Right.
But yeah, I hadn't realized that they had not established that in this issue. You're right. Yeah.
So I was like, where do they come from? Why are they so close? This is weird.
Yeah, they are incredibly close there. That's kind of... Oh, and actually, is there sort of a little velvet rope that's there on that page?
I think it's
right in front of...
I thought that was like television cable, but you're right. It could actually be a velvet rope. The art of LBJ and I guess McNamara really beautifully rendered. Like, Colan went to town on making sure these guys looked good. Just, it's pretty solid. I would like to know if it's menacing that Happy Hogan remembers Tony Stark as Iron Man, because I've never really seen them be enemies, but I don't really know the depths of the lore. Is this a bad thing that he's remembering?
No, it's just bad to the extent that, a hero does not want people to know his secret identity. But that's really the only extent to which it is a bad thing. It's not menacing.
Okay. So they're not setting up like the Happy Iron War.
No, we actually had that previously. He was turned into a villain called the Freak for a while. So we've already had that. By the way, I realize I neglected to point out that the inker who is credited here as Gary Michaels is actually Jack Abel.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And last thing, I love the cover. I think it's great. Very dynamic action happening. Beautiful rendering of Washington, D.C. below. Last episode, I believe I had mentioned how the Tales to Astonish cover I liked a lot, and it reminded me of something of a cover from this month, and this is the cover I had in mind.
Yeah, I like this issue. It's I never jumped to say it's just a full-on battle issue, and I think Cohen, he's no Kirby, but Kirby, there's nothing better than a full-on battle Kirby issue where it's just one big battle. But Cohen, really good. Cohen really enjoys big full-on battle issues, and so I think Stan knows that and likes to give them to him. And this is a good issue. I like this issue.
Yeah. So let's move on to Captain America: Living Legend of World War II. Enter the Tumbler. Okay, one of the lamest villains we've ever seen. As a matter of fact, he reminds me of who was the guy who ended up being part of the, Torrid Twosome in the Strange Tales stories with Johnny.
Yes, so I have read this comic in the past, and I had misremembered that this was the return of the Acrobat. And
right.
The Acrobat had been a villain earlier in Marvel Comics and then had actually imitated Captain America. Before Captain America unfroze, he had seemingly returned when it was actually the Acrobat imitating him. And I was like, even as I read this issue, I'm like, oh, this is the Acrobat and he's back. And then at one point he stops to give his origin. I'm like, we know your origin, you're the Acrobat. And then eventually it took me until like the end of the issue to realize like, oh no, this is an entirely different character. And I had to Google the character to realize this is his first appearance. And he will show up occasionally over the years. This is the Tumbler. The Acrobat will stop showing up. It'll be the Tumbler from this point on. But I got to say, I love this issue. Let me jump ahead and say that this is just a brilliantly conceived book. Once again, we've got Stan Lee and Jack Kirby credited on the same line, so we don't know who should get credit for writing, but let's assume it's Jack. And this is a brilliant concept for this issue where you just had the storyline where like the super adaptoid is taken the place of Steve Rogers. What will happen now? What will he do? And then completely unexpected that what happens is a random supervillain, who I think is supposed to be somewhat lame, shows up to defeat Captain America. And the adaptoid is like, I guess I'm Captain America now, and I guess I have to fight his villains now, but that'll be easy enough. I'm the badass adaptoid. I've just taken over Captain America. This will be an easy fight. But no, he finds that he has taken over Captain America and taken his shield, but he has not taken the ineffable qualities of Captain America, and he actually can't handle the Tumbler, who should be easy to handle. I think that's one reason why they have a lame villain, is like to make it clear that Captain America should be able to handle him easily if he weren't the adaptoid. I think this is just a brilliant, unexpected turn for this story to take. Now, one interesting thing about this comic, I will let you talk about it, but one interesting thing about this comic is that it's very different from most Marvel comics, in that one of the big differences between this and most Marvel comics, and certainly most Kirby Marvel comics, is you have to read the dialogue. Because this is, if you're just reading the comic, you're like, why is Captain America having a hard time fighting this guy? Because it is never shown visually until the very end that this is actually the super adaptoid pretending to be Captain America. The only way that's clear is in the dialogue. And otherwise, it would be a very confusing comic.
Okay, so you've mostly summarized this thing, so I will just briefly go through. So the credits, once again, a Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Pandemonium-packed production, delineated by Richard Ayres, lettered by Samuel Rosen, and then at the bottom, or How Formal Can You Be? So, yes, we start off with a bang with the Tumbler just crashing through a window into Avengers Mansion, because as we've established, Avengers Mansion almost always has zero security whatsoever, and you can just go ahead and waltz right in there. That's, as I've pointed out, how Hawkeye joined the Avengers. They've supposedly got a security system now, but yeah. doesn't matter. So yes, as Matt said, the Adaptoid is currently Captain America. He's trying to keep his cover from being blown, I guess, because he's got another mission that he's supposed to be doing and wants to be able to carry that out. Yeah, the Tumbler is, once again, a megalomaniacal sort of guy who just, sees, these superheroes, what's so great about them? I can do that. And so he learns to do that and then comes out to defeat Captain America because, well, apparently there's some confusion because the Mass Marauder thinks that defeating Daredevil will show that he's unbeatable, whereas here the Tumbler thinks that defeating Captain America will show that he's unbeatable. They need to really get together on which one of those is the measure by which they should be measuring themselves. So lots of great use of Captain America's shield. The real Captain America, meanwhile, is tied up in a closet. We get to see a lot of the work of him getting out of his ropes, and it really looks somewhat believable and like it is a big effort. And we've got one of those things that we often have where guy thinks he's fighting one character and then in the middle of the fight they switch out and now they're fighting somebody else. That happened in Daredevil a few months ago. And, just a fantastic Kirby battle from wall to wall issue. Page 8, panel 3 is just a stunning image of Captain America catching his shield mid-flight. But yeah, the Tumbler is the sort of very, very generic sort of villain. But yeah, as you pointed out, Matt, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be very generic for the reasons you said. And yeah, in the end, it turned out that the Adaptoid, even though it was able to have all of Captain America's powers, did not have his as you said, I think you said his ineffable something or other, but yeah, his willpower or his heart, that is really what makes him super. And it's funny, Cap at the end calls the cops to come and pick up the Acrobat who's tied up, but they just leave the unconscious human-looking person in a Captain America costume. They're like, we got this one. They're like, oh no, we're cool with this one over here. Don't worry, we got him. But then it turns out the Adaptoid then turns back into his Adaptoid form once he is locked in some sort of a room, and it is thinking to itself that, okay, well, now I can just keep on absorbing the abilities of different characters and eventually I will get great. Oh, the only other thing that I have to say about this issue is did you look at the letters page?
What? What's going on the letters page?
We have a letter from Marvin Wolfman.
Yes.
Oh, we do.
That was one of the
Yes.
things I was very excited about.
I know, right?
He calls himself Marvin, but they call him Marv. They say, thanks, Marv, which will be the name
Maybe that's where
better known by when he goes to work for Marvel.
Marv Wolfman.
Yeah, he might have seen this and been like, Marv, that's cool. Stan Lee called me Marv. Okay, that's it. From now on, I'm Marv. Yeah. So I don't really have anything else to comment on this issue. If either of you have something to say, please say it.
Yeah, I thought it was a very fun story just for that dichotomy between the Adaptoid and actual Captain America. Very kinetic issue with all the fighting and punching. What has been great about rereading these comics is there are so many villains that I have never seen again. And the Tumbler is one of them. I was like, who the heck is this Batrock knockoff?
Yeah, good point. He does look like Batroc, doesn't he?
Yeah, it was just a fun little story. Good fight, good twist. I'm sure there's no way that locking an Adaptoid in your basement will come back to haunt you.
Oh, of course not.
And the Marv Wolfman letter was something I read. I did go through all the letter sections just to see if there were any names that would jump out, and I was rewarded.
Yes.
Yes, and we've seen many letters from future Marvel creators before this point, as well as George R. Martin. Yeah, who else have we seen so far? I think we saw Frank Brunner, didn't we?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of him. We've seen a lot of Dave Cockrum. He shows up a lot. And then, yeah, we saw the very first issue that they had a letters column.
Oh, Steve Gerber.
Steve Gerber showed up a lot. The very first issue they had a letters column. The first letter was from Roy Thomas. And,
oh my gosh.
He would, yeah. But so then, and he eventually, lots of people who eventually end up working Marvel Comics. Yeah, let me just say, this is a great issue. It's very funny. It's a very humorous issue in that Like the Templar says, like, I'm going to go fight Captain America. It's like, this is going really well. I am beating up Captain America. I can't believe how well this is going. And then knocks him into the other room. And then who should come actually in the room but the real Captain America, who then instantly just kicks his ass. And he's like, okay, this was going so well. What was going wrong here? I was kicking Captain America's ass. And now suddenly he has come out and he is kicking my ass and sends him spinning here on the last page. And that is just a very funny story. It's just a very funny concept for the story and such a creative way for the Adaptoid to be dispatched and just really funny. I think this is just a delightful issue.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we have been recording for almost 3 hours. Let's go ahead and quickly dispense with the Avengers, the Living Lasers. Stan Lee's farewell to the Avengers. Now, Steve, I know that you are very sensitive about the way in which laser people are treated in the comics, and that you and your fellow laser people have been often abused, misused, misrepresented. You are not looking necessarily for a mirror. You were just looking for a window. You were looking for some way to see laser people better represented. Now, I should explain, Rachel, that Steve is a laser technician in one of his many jobs, teaches lasers at his local makerspace, and runs the lasers and maintains the lasers. And we are finally getting, you are going to be seen, Steve, because you are going to have a laser character in this comic.
Well, remember, I actually introduced myself 2 episodes ago as the Living Laser in our episode introduction. I had no idea the Living Laser was showing up the very next month, but...
Are you okay with the fact that he is a villain, though?
You take what you can get at this point in history, yeah.
They were trying. They were trying to give greater visibility to laser people, and they were failing to a certain extent. They were not giving it your due. And then there's even a bar. There's even a beer at your local brewery called Laser Steve that is named after you. Correct?
This is correct.
Wow,
yes.
You're like the laser legend at this point.
Apparently so. I did not know. I had met the brewmeister and had a conversation with him that I instantly forgot afterwards, where he's like, I introduced myself. I run the lasers. My name's Steve. And he's like, Laser Steve sounds like a cool name for a beer. What kinds of beer do you like? And I talked to him about him, and then I completely forgot about that conversation. And then several months later, some people were coming around it was like a downtown business kind of social networking sort of thing. And so people from these different groups were circulating around to different departments in the makerspace. And like the second or third group got to me at the lasers, and I introduced myself, and they're like, "You're Laser Steve," and I had no idea what they were talking about. But yeah,
so
figured it out eventually.
Stan Lee seems to be a little confused here as to whether or not they should call him the Living Laser or just the Laser. Now, Stan Lee does something here on his final issue of Avengers where he has a conceit to the scripting where he's like pretending this is a simplistic children's book where he's like, see the man in the strange costume. He is a bad man. He is robbing a bank. He is called the Laser. Can you tell why he is called the Laser? Let us read the story and see what happens to the wicked Laser. So this is sort of a running, just sort of joke he has, like, oh, let's pretend this is a silly kid story. And I'm like, Stan, this is a silly kid story. You're not, this is not your silly kid stories. This is, in fact, a silly kid story. And scripting it as if it is a primer is not doing it any favors.
So meanwhile, I'm just going to go ahead and say a little something I was going to say about this issue. The credits are spellbinding story, Smilin' Stan Lee, awe-inspiring artwork, Dash and Donnie Heck, lots of little lettering by adorable Artie Simak. And I said in the previous issue, Rachel, I, for quite a while here, at doing, over the 3 years we've been doing this podcast, have been a contrarian defender of Don Heck's art in many cases. His early Iron Man and Ant-Man and Wasp stories really had just a charm to them that I saw that apparently most people don't see. The previous issue of the Avengers was also drawn by Don Heck and was terrible. And so I said, you know what? And he's been getting worse, and I just don't think he was the good fit on the Avengers in general. But I was like, okay, you know what? My days of defending Don Heck are probably over. It's the honeymoon is done. But I've got to say, this issue has a little bit of that charm back, and I will stand by that.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I was thinking about various comics artists and, how there needs to be a right fit for them.
Mhm.
Bob Brown is somebody who I think of, who I did not think was a great fit on the Avengers. He had a run in the
I didn't
late
think he was.
60s or early 70s, and I didn't like it. But then I've seen his more cartoony stuff, and I'm like, wow, he's great. It is a matter of getting the right fit for what he can do.
Yeah, we found the same thing with Joe Orlando, too.
Yeah.
But, all right, I have to get my son to a play date, so I'm going to deal with this issue in 5 minutes. So then we have the Living Laser is robbing a bank, but doesn't actually want anything he stole from the bank. He just drops it off. He just wants to show everybody how cool he is. And then we have the Avengers get the call, and then we get a bizarre sort of like, well, we haven't done a Wasp-centric issue in a while, so let's go ahead and have the Wasp. The Wasp runs into one of her society ladies who she knows, and the society lady's like, yeah, I've been getting hassled by this Living Laser guy. And then the Living Laser guy gets one look at Wasp and is like, nope, I like her now, which is similar to the old Tales to Astonish storyline, I guess, with the Human Top, or no, it was somebody else. Eventually the Human Top will become the Whirlwind and will become obsessed with Wasp, but I think there was someone else who was obsessed with how pretty she was before, but now that is the Living Laser.
It may have been him, but I will point out, you said that hey, this Living Laser guy is harassing me. They don't say at this point it's the Living Lasers. It's just his alter ego is an ex-boyfriend of hers who is stalking her in various ways.
Yes. So then I'm glad to get Bill Foster back. We have Bill Foster was originally introduced just to be Hank Pym's black assistant so that they could have him get race bashed by the Sons of the Serpent. And I thought that was going to be the last we saw of him for a while. But no, he is still here. He is still working with Hank, trying to cure his gigantism. And then who should show up but the Living Laser, who has come for the Wasp. But the Living Laser, bizarrely, is like happy that the Wasp is leaving so that he can attack Hank and Bill. It's like, well, didn't you come here for the Wasp? Why are you glad she's leaving? That was unclear. But then he goes ahead and he can sort of fly a little bit with his lasers, so he's able to lower himself from the ceiling, which is somewhat odd. Then Hank pretty quickly dispatches with the Living Laser and deals with him and beats him up. And they're like, great. The Avengers show up in a flying car. They're like, let's go ahead and take the Living Laser into the police to be turned in. But then the Living Laser wakes up, shoots his way out of the bottom, flies off. One of many characters I don't think should be able to fly, but he is. Hawkeye and Captain America have to shoot an arrow into a bridge to save themselves, which is quite silly. I don't think that Stan Lee understands how suction cups work. They really aren't this effective.
Well, I mean, suction cups in the Marvel Universe are very much like masks in the Marvel Universe. The technology is well beyond our ability to fully comprehend.
They are very, very good suction cups. And so then they go and confront the Living Laser in his lair with sort of classic Heck lumpy machinery, sort of like massive spreading blob of machinery on page 19. We then get the Living Laser sticks Captain America and Hawkeye in a little surrounding cell of lasers. Now, this will lead to a great Marvel No Prize panel next issue, but that does not happen yet this issue, so we will discuss it then. He then kidnaps the Wasp, who is, as usual, not very useful superheroine, and that is our cliffhanger, and that is Stan Lee's farewell to this book. Stan Lee will never again write an issue of the Avengers. Roy Thomas will take over next issue and will at first sort of struggle along until Roy Thomas, for some reason, even though I think of him as less being a Marvel Method guy, is even more artist dependent than Stan is. And Roy can be a great writer with a great artist and can be a bad writer with a bad artist like Werner Roth. But soon, Roy and Don Heck will do a couple issues that'll be okay. And then John Buscema will join this book and Roy will suddenly blossom into being a great writer. And John Buscema will be a great artist. And this book will be excellent for the first time since the very early Lee Kirby days. What did you guys think of this book? Rachel, what did you think of this issue?
Well, this is one that I know more from general knowledge than from specific knowledge. But I will say that I have a soft spot for the Wasp. She often was made to look pretty silly and useless, but I'm more devoted to her than Sue Storm. I don't know why. That's just the logic that I have. It is interesting to see this be a Goliath story, because I think the Hank Pym as Goliath is the era I know least about. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is not the first time. I guess a criminal's going to get obsessed. Well, it's not the last time. I guess it's not the first or last, based on what you were saying about earlier Tales to Astonish, that somebody's gotten obsessed with the Wasp. I guess she really exists to attract supervillains somehow. But the thing is, like, she is very rarely, like, she is, everybody acknowledges that she's pretty, but she's very rarely used to be like an actual like sex bait. Guys just get drawn to her, and she's not trying. It just happens.
It doesn't hurt that she's also wealthy. One of my favorite lines from any movie is in a movie that is not generally a very funny movie. An Affair to Remember has a very funny line where at the beginning they're talking about how there is this beautiful heiress who is attracting all these men, and they're talking about how much money she has. The sort of wags on the radio are talking about how much money they have, and then they say that's a lot of lettuce and quite a tomato to go with it. So this is true of the Wasp. It's a lot of lettuce and quite a tomato to go with it.
So I've just got to, I know, Matt, you need to go, so I'll try to do this quickly. I do notice that at one point when they think they're going to have a free day before the living laser becomes their thing, Janet's like, oh, good, I can go shopping, which, you know, okay, sure, fine, whatever. But the society lady, you know, the fellow debutante whom she runs into, her last name is Barton, like the same last name as Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Which, is that going to pay off anywhere?
Nope, just lazy scripting by Stan.
But yeah, this is, and like I said, there is some of that some of that charm that Don Heck had earlier in this issue, but there's also some really not good stuff in here. There's I'm trying to see what page this is on. Yeah, so page 11, panel 1. Don seems to have just gotten lazy and just been like, oh, I'm just gonna have sort of a close-up on his face and then sort of some laser blasting. And what's going on? Who knows? Who cares? It doesn't really matter. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that there is still some of that. At one point, Hawkeye says something like, we'd look nutty going into action on roller skates. And last issue, the Iron Man was using roller skates in the previous month in a way that looked very silly. And finally, Wasp, when she is trying to mess with the machinery from the inside, she thinks to herself, now, they could have done this much better. She thinks to herself, if I only understood these things like a man, I'll bet Goliath would have had this all figured out by now. No, how about if only I understood these things like, you know, Tony Stark or Hank? You know, it's like somebody who has technical knowledge, not just a man. But yeah.
That's got to be one of the all-time worst lines in Marvel history. Sorry I failed to mention that. That is really atrocious. Like, she has thought similar things in the past, but that's the worst she's ever phrased it. If only I could figure this out like a man could. That's just really painful. So, Rachel, I should point out, you are our first female guest. We are up to issue 94 or so of this show.
Oh, well.
I am so glad we could have you here for that shining moment in Marvel history. We can have you say that is wrong. Rachel, would you agree that is wrong to script it in that way?
That is wrong. And I have to say, 10 years later, when Wonder Man is like being dazzled by Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel, or as Ms. Marvel, she was then, him going, wow, she doesn't just pose and point the way Scarlet Witch or the Wasp does. She punches somebody like a man would. There's still going to be ways to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, they were trying. But yeah, Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and sharing your editor's perspective on a lot of these things.
Yes.
Do you care to once again, since this is the end of another episode, do you care to tell our audience once again where they can find you online if they wish?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun to read some comics and talk about them. It's amazing how little I get to do that, actually. So you can find me on social media, rgluckst, on Blue Sky, Instagram, and formerly known as Twitter, and also my website, superstareditor.com. And yeah, I will see you all on the funny pages, I guess.
Thank you so much for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to have you back anytime.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, and thank you, dear listeners, for listening to us geek out about comics for a while. I will say goodbye, and take care and stay safe out there.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to marvelrereadclub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.